This is an oral history interview with writer and longtime Wilton resident Eunice Clark Jessup at her home on Ridgefield Road on Friday, May 9, 1986. The interviewer is Carol Nichols. Eunice, I'd like to begin this interview with some reminiscences about your family and your early life. You were born on June 1, 1911 in New York City. Tell me about your parents. What were their names? Tell me about your parents, Eunice. What were their names?
My father, Frederick Clark, was an engineer, and my mother, Eleanor Phelps Clark, they were. My mother and father were separated in 1917, and my mother became a school administrator, assistant to the headmistress of Dana Hall and then Rosemary Hall until we got through school.
So your mother was from New York City as well?
She was born in California. Her parents were 49ers. But she went to Barnard. They moved back to New York.
When she was a young woman?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so she's a college graduate, which would have made her one of the early women college graduates.
Well,
probably one of the first generation of women.
I suppose she graduated from college about 1901 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were plenty of college graduates by that time.
Relatively few compared to the rest of the population.
Maybe,
But I assume that she must have trained to be a teacher.
No, she just spoke. She traveled a great deal, and she spoke French and Italian, and she took graduate courses in various things.
So when you were very young then, your mother was working?
Well, not until after World War I.
Mm-hmm.
She started working in the 20s.
And so first she worked at Dana Hall and then Rosemary Hall. Are those schools that you attended?
Yeah.
I happen to have done some research on one of the headmistresses of Rosemary Hall, Caroline Roots-Reese.
Yeah.
Did you know her?
Very well, yeah.
Sometime we'll have to talk about her and what you thought of her, because
a great woman.
She was a
great scholar. I learned an awful lot from her.
She also was very active in the women's movement.
Was she?
A leader of the women's suffrage movement.
Oh, was she?
Yeah. But I assume from the fact that you don't seem to know that about her, that it was not
Latin and literature, and Latin and Greek, Latin mostly.
Yeah.
And philosophy, I don't know. Academic subjects.
Yeah, I know she was a great scholar and a translator of many works from the French, if I recall. I think she wrote a great deal. She was a very wonderful woman, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, when you went to Rosemary Hall, were you living in Greenwich, or did you board there?
No, my mother was the assistant to Miss Roots-Reese, and we boarded there.
And you lived right there in Greenwich.
I lived in school for 4 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you had to characterize your mother, how would you describe her?
Well, she was a very vivid and very cultured, very person, and a great conversationalist.
It sounds like you got some of those qualities from her. Did you know your father very well?
Very well, yeah. he was a wonderful man. They just didn't get along.
Did he also live in New York?
Oh, he lived all over the place. He was a mining engineer. Traveled a lot.
Oh, I see. So what kind of background did he have?
His father was the head of economics department at Columbia. He was one of 4 children. He himself went to Amherst. He was a great outdoorsman, great guitar player and folk singer, and very nice man. He took us camping a lot.
How did your parents meet?
I don't know. They were both in New York.
Yeah, I guess.
My grandfather Clark was the head of economics at Columbia, and
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather Phelps was a prominent lawyer in New York. So just the same society.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you were growing up, you obviously had this exposure to both of them, and I assume both of them were very intellectual and I assume valued education quite highly.
Well, I don't understand words like intellectual. They don't mean anything to me. My father was, if anything, anti-intellectual. And he was raised in an academic family, and he was anti-intellectual. It's a meaningless word, intellectual.
Yeah,
Absolutely senseless.
Okay. You have one sister.
Yes.
And she also is a writer.
She's a prominent writer, yes.
Who was the older of the two?
I was.
You were very close to your sister. I have read in the Wilton Bulletin that you were very close today, so I assume...
Well, we see each other a lot, yes.
Mm-hmm. Did she have the same kind of education that you had?
She was in Europe more than I was.
How much writing did you do as a young
I wrote
person?
all the time. From the age of 12.
Is that right?
Almost entirely poems. Mostly poems and stories. I wrote all the time.
Did this something that I have a feeling it's just something that came from within you? Was there anyone in particular who nurtured that talent?
Well, of course, all the English teachers were delighted.
When you wrote poetry, can you think of any particular themes that seem to stand out? Or just childhood
just
verses?
Girlhood stuff.
Yeah. Can you remember any of them?
No.
Were you interested in other subjects besides writing?
Well, at Rosemary Hall we had a lot of Latin, and I spent a lot of time on Latin and English literature. And in college I majored in Vassar, I majored in English, and also took quite a lot of economics because of my grandfather being a most prominent American economist at Columbia. There's a certain contradiction between those two occupations. And I always, I'd been to school in France for a year, so I was bilingual.
Did you go to school in France before college, during college, or after?
I went to school in France before going to Rosemary Hall. When I was 13, I was in school in France, most of the time in a boarding school, in a convent school, French convent school, and part of the time in Paris.
Well, that was an unusual experience for a young teenager.
Well, I was 13, 14, yeah.
Yeah. Did you, do you have fond memories of that?
I don't know.
That was in the teens, early 20s.
Early 20s, yes. 1924.
So, what you'd probably call the post-war period, post-World War One.
I guess so, yeah.
Now, I have the impression that you spent quite a bit of time as a child in Roxbury, Connecticut, as well.
My mother's house was in Roxbury, and we spent summers there.
You spent all of your summers there? Most of your summers there.
Well, not every minute. We visited grandparents and
Well, Roxbury today is known as a community where many writers and artists seem to congregate. Was that true at the time?
No, there weren't any writers there. None. When we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there weren't any city people, really, except one or two. There was only one family other than that, native farmers besides us.
Really? So what do you think provoked your mother to buy this house?
She liked it. And my father, they ran it as a farm. In the 3 years that they were still together, they ran it as a farm, very great big farm, cattle and everything. It's because my father, having been a mining engineer, had heart trouble and couldn't go back into the mines. So his family helped buy this farm so he could be a farmer instead. And they ran a very big farm. And then in 1917, my father went down to work for the government in connection with the war, shipping board. Mm-hmm. And he and my mother were not getting along, so he did not come back and resume the farming. And my mother liquidated the farming part of the job, and because she had TB. So she was in a sanitarium for 2 years, and my sister and I lived with my grandparents in New York. And as soon as she got well and she came out, we kept Roxbury as a place to go and live, and then she went and took the job at Dana Hall and began working in schools for the next 8 years until Eleanor and I were out of school.
Well, you went to Vassar when you finished at Rosemary Hall.
Yeah.
What made you choose Vassar?
I didn't choose it, it was just there. My grandmother was one of the first graduates from Vassar.
I have a feeling that's true for a lot of the people who went to college at that time. It was just someone said, oh, that's the right place to go, and one did it.
I never considered it at all. My grandmother was in the first graduating class from Vassar. I just never thought about it.
How did you like it?
Fine.
Tell me the dates if you're attending.
I went in and I graduated in 33, so I must have gone in 29.
One of the things that you had told me when we met last time was that you did quite a lot of writing at Vassar.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of your writing experiences?
Well, I just wrote all the time. I wrote stuff in the Miscellany News.
What is the Miscellany News?
It's a Vassar newspaper. So I wrote for that all the time I was there and ended up editing it. I wrote pieces for the Vassar Review, the literary magazine. And I went to the Gospel trial and wrote a very long piece about that for the Vassar Review.
Really? They sent you to that?
Hmm?
Did the school send you to that?
Oh, no, I went. That was in the spring of 33. I went with a group of people to the Gospel trial and wrote all that up. I don't know all the stuff I wrote for the Vassar Review. I just lots of poems.
Do you have any of those materials? Have you kept your writings from that period?
I may have. I could have to look for them.
Yeah, that would be a nice addition to this interview.
Yeah, I'll try and find some.
It sounds, for someone to go to the Scottsboro trial somehow suggests that you were not a placid, quiet, young college
I was a
student.
socialist. I considered myself a socialist. I was for Norman Thomas.
Yeah. And how about Eugene Debs? Was he about?
No,
he was a little earlier.
That was
I guess.
earlier, yeah. I never thought about him.
Were you a member of the Socialist Party, or was it just your ideological?
I think I was. I'm not sure.
I know there were a lot of people
I think
at that time. Socialists.
I think maybe I joined the Socialist Party when I was in college. I don't remember.
This is in the late 20s, early 30s. How would you compare your political leanings with most of the people at Vassar?
We were all socialists. The faculty voted socialist.
Yes,
Between 1929 and 23, majority of the faculty voted socialist. Yeah, this was the time of the Depression.
Yes, I know.
And of the students, I would think at least 30% of them are socialists. So there was nothing larky about being a socialist.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. It was very respectable. However, many of the people who were socialists at that time became Roosevelt Democrats.
Yeah, eventually we swung around, at least by 19... First we suspected him of not being as liberal as he thought he was, but eventually we swung around, sure.
I don't think he was as liberal as he became, in a way. If you follow his early history, he certainly didn't campaign as a socialist.
We didn't trust the first gestures, but eventually we got. Then of course the war came along.
Yeah. But I think your experience is very typical of a lot of.
Very typical.
Yeah. Besides your writing life and your socialist leanings, what was life like at college otherwise in terms of social life and relationships?
Well, you had dates whenever you could get them. No.
The men came from all of the Ivy League schools, I assume.
No,
No?
not necessarily. What the hell?
Well,
Why? I didn't know very many people. I had some dates.
Yeah.
And in my senior year, I met Selden Rodman, who was had been the editor of the Harkness Hoot at Yale, and he was publishing a magazine in New York called Common Sense. And I got engaged to him.
Uh-huh. And
I married him.
oh, you did?
Yeah.
You married him after you graduated from
Yeah,
Vassar?
the week after I graduated, I married Selden Rodman.
I didn't know that. This is something you hadn't told me the first time, I guess. You also said that you had studied in Geneva, and I was wondering whether that was
in
after.
the summer of 1931, my mother and my sister and I went to Europe, and I went to the international school in Geneva to study foreign affairs.
I see. So it sounds like you had something of a world vision. I mean, would you say you were idealistic, or?
Yeah, I suppose so. World vision is slightly pretentious, but yeah, I was idealistic, sure.
Yeah. Well, from what I'm sure we'll talk about your later life, but I think some of that remained. That is, believing that one could make change probably came from that time. Well, when you married, did you go to New York City then?
Yeah, I went to New York.
Then I guess that explains why you had once said to me that you worked for a magazine called Common Sense.
Yeah.
Tell me about that publication.
It was a left-wing publication on an American basis, like progressives, like the Follets.
Mm-hmm.
It was not Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
It was just left-wing. It was for the people. And in the sense that the Follets were Native American progressivism.
Yeah. And you wrote for this magazine? What kinds of articles did you
Anything
write
came
about?
along. I wrote about economics, affairs, did portraits, I did profiles of political figures. I can find some of that stuff.
That would be great. Was this a short-term job or something
I was
that
married
you
to
did?
the editor. I worked there all the time. And the marriage broke up. I was married in '33, and by the end of 1935, we separated, and I took odds and ends of jobs, and then until I went to work in Fortune in the spring of '36.
You also told me, however, that in this period you were up in Roxbury putting together a magazine.
Oh yeah, my sister and I got out a magazine before we graduated from college in the summer of '32. We published a magazine. It had 4 issues, and there were a lot of writers around there who helped us out and wrote for us. Mary Beard helped us a lot, and it was a very nice magazine. I can show you that later, too.
Oh, I'd love to see
4
that
issues.
4 issues in one summer?
Yeah.
That's quite an
Well,
astounding
we worked at it all the
accomplishment.
time, and it was very smart of us, too, because it meant that when we got to New York, we had no trouble getting jobs.
Now, the Housatonic magazine was not a political magazine, I assume. Not like Common Sense.
Well, I wrote a piece about farmers' cooperatives. I don't know whether that's political or not.
Well, but
We weren't right-wing, or
Yeah.
no, we didn't set ourselves up as a left-wing or right-wing magazine, but of course we were naturally liberal-minded.
did it also contain literary pieces, poetry, short
Some
stories,
poetry,
and so
yeah,
on?
poetry, yeah.
Did you and your sister do all of the writing?
No, we had Mary Beard wrote for us.
She wrote.
Oh, Matthew Josephson wrote for us. A lot of people wrote for us. Selden Lyman wrote for us.
That's very exciting. Were you tempted to keep it going?
Well, no, we were both in college.
But when you came back, you could have resumed
Well, no,
it.
then I got
You got
married and
married.
went to work in Common Sense.
Yeah.
Eleanor went to Europe for her last year.
All of this time, however, even when you, aside from your official work, you were writing poetry
Yeah.
and writing for other magazines, I understand.
Yeah, I can't remember what they all were.
Well, one of them you told me was The Nation.
I had poems in The Nation, and I had a poem and poems in poetry. I think one in New Republic. I can find that out.
For someone as young as you were really launched on what may have become a very exciting, brilliant career as a writer. How did you envision your future when you got out of school?
I didn't think about it. I just did what was there to do. Wrote all the time, published what I could.
I assume, though, that there were a lot of young women who did not, even who went to college, assumed they would get married, settle down, and raise families, and be domestic engineers. Did you think of yourself that way?
I don't know. This question about what I thought of myself are
Yeah.
absolutely unanswerable because I have
Yeah.
no idea.
Well,
I
okay.
just did I had classmates Elizabeth Bishop and Mary McCarthy. There were quite a few of us that went on to writing careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I knew, I had been told that you knew Mary McCarthy, and I wanted to ask you a bit about her. She was a member of your class?
Yeah.
What was your response to her book, The Group, which of course was about the class of 1933?
Well, it was a stinking book, but her trick there was, Mary was an orphan, and she hadn't had any family life. Her parents died in when she was very small, both of them, in an epidemic. And she was raised temporarily by another grandfather and then in a convent. And so she had not had very much family life. And when she got to Vassar, she visited people all the time and was fascinated by other people's family lives. And when she came to write The Group, she would take various characters and borrow somebody else's family life and pin it on them. So it was a hodgepodge of things where sometimes the characters would be recognizable and their families would not, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
The family would be recognizable, and then the daughter would be a bitch. And so, in that sense, it was not a very admirable book. And I mean, she was borrowing everybody's family and filling them up with characters that did not necessarily belong to them.
Well, she's done this with other books. She has certainly used real people to and distorted their characters a great deal for the benefit of the book.
Yeah.
I assume since you were one of the people in that class that you must have had very strong reaction to the book and to her.
Well, she had been a very close friend for several years when I got out of college. But when I moved out here, I didn't see so much of her anymore. And I don't think my friends and I were very pleased with the book now.
When you and I talked before, you told me that in the mid-30s you went to Washington to do some investigative reporting. I wrote that down on my notes, and I had some questions because I couldn't remember. I didn't remember or get it clearly. I had down that you went to work for Mark Antonio.
Mark Antonio. Oh, yeah, I did a couple of months' work. That was in 1935. I went to Washington for 2 or 3 weeks to handle publicity for Mark Antonio.
And who was Mark Antonio?
He was a very left-wing congressman from New York, and he was investigating. He was running an investigation of silicosis in the West Virginia coal mines. Mm-hmm. So I did the publicity for that.
I see. Such interesting opportunities that you had. Whatever came of that work?
Well, he did the work, and then there was some legislation, and I think they got after the coal companies.
Yeah, so this was during the New Deal.
They would have to pay for people who got silicosis.
So now we have asbestosis to deal with, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, soon after that, you went to work for Fortune magazine.
36. Yeah.
And since it was very special that you got to work for Fortune, it would be nice if you could tell the story of how you got that job.
Well, there's nothing to it. I was qualified.
Well, I understand that, but you were the first woman writer.
Oh, but I didn't go on as a writer. I went on as a researcher. All the jobs on Fortune at that time for women were researchers. And I had a record of having done a lot of work and
Mm-hmm.
writing all right, so there was no trouble at getting that job.
And for whom were you doing research?
Anybody. My first year I did research for, I can't remember anymore, several stories, and then in the middle of this year I went to work on the John L. Lewis story with John Jessup.
Oh.
And we worked on that story for 2 months, at the end of which we had fallen in love. And he had to get a divorce and I had to get a divorce, and so we didn't marry until 37. And in the ensuing year I worked for Archibald McLeish and for several months, and he got a lot of my poems published.
Oh, he did? In other magazines?
Yeah, I mean, he was the one that sent it to the Nation. He was very enterprising in that.
It sounds like he somehow felt
Oh,
that
yeah.
you were a talent to be...
We were very, very close, yeah.
Hold it. You were saying that you were very close to
Well,
Archibald
yeah, we got along
McLeish.
fine. Yeah, he liked me. And he liked the poems. He did a lot for me.
You said that he liked you so much that he did help to get you into this writing position at Fortune.
No.
No.
Oh, yes, I did say that. Before he left, which would have been, I think, about May 1937, he thought it was he had let me do quite a lot of writing for him, and he let me do captions and things like that. And he announced to Fortune, managing editor then was Russell Davenport, that it wasn't fair for somebody who wrote as well as I did to always be in a researcher position, and that women should, if they could write, should be allowed to write, and that it was wrong to have men being the writers and women being the researchers. It was very sexist. So Fortune agreed, and I did a story. I wrote a story on the Swedish financial system, the Swedish budget. And then I started doing a lot of military research, thinking that I was going to do a piece on the military preparedness in this country. But the managing editor, who was still Russell Davenport, decided that they couldn't send a woman down to interview the military, and so I got very angry and left.
I was going to ask you whether, I mean, you have said to me also earlier, you didn't think so much about women's rights and things like this, but you yourself experienced blatant discrimination.
Yeah.
Did you see this as a sort of individual problem and not so much one for organizing?
Well, I've never been very agitated about women. I figure that if they can get there, they will.
Yeah, well, that's certain. It in a way.
Anyway, it's just a cause I had never taken up. I have nothing against it. It just wasn't.
Yeah. But the fact that you would resign over that
well, yes,
says a lot
because
about
I
you.
had written it. You see, I had written a perfectly presentable story that they didn't find anything wrong with, and then this, and I had done all the research for the next story.
And you told me that McLeish was very angry as well.
No, he'd left by that time.
He had left.
No, I never talked to him about it.
I guess when you describe your working for Fortune, I'm struck by the fact that you went from a magazine like Common Sense to Fortune, which I don't know much about Fortune at that time, but it certainly would not have been considered
all the writers were liberals. My God, Jim Agee was there. There were heaps of left-wing writers that used to bother Harry. As a matter of fact, because all the writers were so liberal, and he wasn't.
You must have met some of the most interesting people in America when you were in New York?
I don't know, maybe.
As a single woman, no, but you were single just briefly, I suppose, actually, when you
yeah.
were in New York. But you were in a very interesting circle of people, I assume. Are there any people who stand out among your many friends?
Well, who did I go around with? I went around with Dwight McDonald, Jeffrey Hellman, James Agee, Jack Jessup. Wilder Hobson was Jack's best friend. It was a whole generation.
Yeah.
We'd come out of college in the late 20s.
Well, people of my generation have an image of people like you in New York, drinking coffee and saying exciting, creative, wonderful things to one another.
That's pretty sentimental.
But I have a feeling I'm not way off. So in 1937, you married Jack Jessup,
Yeah.
who was also a writer for Fortune.
Yeah.
And I very much like to hear what you'd like to say about him, since I read in the library's brochure that he was the walking encyclopedia and one of the most cultured journalists produced by Yale. I'm quoting Osgood Nichols.
Oh, Jim put that in. Yeah, he certainly was that. He was very good looking, very presentable guy. And he was encyclopedic. He could remember everything. He'd read everything. He was a real scholar, beautiful writer. Never put a word in the wrong place.
Really. When he was working for when you married, he was working for Fortune, but you then said that he went to do some work for the War Department or to write a war manual, no? A handbook of the war.
I wrote that.
You wrote the handbook of the war.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that World War II or?
Yeah, let's see. When I left Fortune, I got a contract from Houghton Mifflin because I had done all that military research before I left Fortune. So I wrote a book called A Handbook of the War. There were a couple of guys from the Foreign Policy Association who wrote the political stuff, and I wrote the military stuff.
Interesting. I take it. I assume
fall of 39, just after we got in the war.
Would you be in the category of the preparedness crowd, or were you more inclined to stay out of this European conflict?
I wasn't in that. I wasn't even thinking about it.
No.
I was just a researcher.
Yeah. Well, after you got married to Jack, you continued to live in New York, and you continued to work as a writer.
Yeah.
One of the jobs you said that you had was the translation of La Fontaine's fables.
Let's see, the La Fontaine was 1945. No, later than that even. I think it's 46 or 7.
But this is before you moved to Wilton.
I moved here in 52, yeah.
So how did you get that job?
People come and offer it to me. I don't go after jobs.
Are you lucky? Well, you obviously had a reputation, and I suppose you're French.
I spoke beautiful French, and people I knew were getting out, had the contract with Alexander Calder to illustrate La Fontaine's fables, and they wanted them translated in English verse. So they got me to do it.
And that was published?
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful book.
I
You
was
can
gonna
see that down there.
My!
That's a beautiful book.
Oh, how exciting!
Yes.
At the same time, your husband was working for whom?
Fortune.
Still for Fortune in the 40s.
Let's see, 19 1948 or 9, he began to write editorials for Life.
Oh, I see.
And then he went on doing that the rest of his working life.
Well, you stayed in New York until 1952. By this time, Jack was working for Life. Was he already the senior editorial writer?
I think starting about 48 or 49, he was the editorial writer.
Did he get to then make the editorial decisions as well?
No. But he was not, they didn't interfere with what he wrote.
Uh-huh.
Although in the case of Characterize, Harry Luce reserved that for himself. Because Jack hasn't been able to go along with that.
You said he also had did some work for CBS.
That was after he retired.
Okay. Well, what did he do for them when he retired?
1969, he retired from Life, and after a couple of years, he got a job as a news commentator on CBS, which he did for about 5 years.
On CBS radio or television?
Radio.
Let's talk about your move to Wilton, since this is Wilton history. What made you decide to come here?
I had 4 children and the schools were too expensive. And I had a cottage in the country, a cabin in the country on a river in New Jersey. But that was burned up, so we didn't have any place to go on weekends. And our 4th child was coming along. And the private school, we lived on 83rd Street. You couldn't send kids to public schools really up there.
Mm.
So the private school thing was looking too difficult for 4 kids. And schools out here were very good, and we had friends out here who wanted us to come out.
You had friends in Wilton?
Oh, yeah. Alfred Winslow Jones was here. We were very close friends. A lot of us came out at the same time. Darrow's, the people who'd known each other in New York. Malcolm Reese's.
So when you came here, you bought a house on this property on Ridgefield Road, which soon after had a very bad fire.
3 years later, yeah.
And since I think that must have become it obviously is an event in Wilton history. The way it was written up in your biography for the library, it was an opportunity for the Wilton, your fellow citizens, to...
Oh, they did wonderful things for us here. Absolutely extraordinary.
How did the fire start?
This fireplace had been built in 1800, I guess, and the cement wasn't very good, and we'd had a large family, with teenagers and children and everything, and we'd been burning the fire all day Christmas, and it went down through the cement into the beams.
So it was on Christmas Day?
Christmas night, yeah. So we woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there were flames all over here.
How much of the house was
It
damaged?
was gutted. Mm-hmm. All the interiors had to be made over, but they saved the outside.
This was saved by the Wilton Volunteer Fire Department, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
What did Jim Nichols mean when he said that the neighbors had a chance to express their gratitude to you?
Well, we were offered all kinds of houses, and we stayed at the Jones house for a while, and they went over and lived in the Kaiser house. The Kaisers had a house in Cannondale, and we lived there until June, and they had parties for us all the time. A party for linens, a party for bric-a-brac. People brought us food. They dressed the children.
Is that right?
And brought me suitcases full of clothes. And Jack got on his nerves. He said, I'll take anything I can, they'll let me pay for it, because we hadn't paid for anything for a couple of months after the fire.
That is really a testimony to you as well as to the people here.
Town.
Well, they must have cared a lot about you, or they wouldn't have done it. That suggests that in a mere 3 years you were already well known and very much a part of this community. What did you do to become a part of this community? You had 4 children. One was an infant, right? And the oldest must have been around 10 years old.
Yeah, we were 52. One was 10, one was just born, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you become involved in any kinds of organizations when you came here?
I can't remember. I couldn't very well, I don't think. Getting a household organized and settled. I don't think I did much. I suppose
It's hard to imagine you could have done very much with 4 young children. How much support did they have here? Did they have nursery school?
my older daughter went to nursery school, and my younger son, I guess, went into first or second grade, I guess.
What schools did they attend?
Public schools.
Well, yes, but I would guess center school.
I don't remember.
You don't remember the
what
one
grade?
down in the center?
I don't remember where they went.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if any of the other, if Comstock was built by that time. Do you remember what nursery school they went to?
Yeah, it was that down there, the community nursery school Rebecca went to. My daughter was 4, 3 and a half.
Yeah, that's where my children went also.
Yeah.
Jim Nichols said, the Jessups were the greatest gift to Wilton.
Well, he's just being googly.
Well, people don't say that about everyone. I know one of the things that you started, and it may have been much later in your life in Wilton, and that was a great books course.
Yeah, I ran that for several years. I can't even remember what years, 5 or 6 years.
Did you, it was your idea?
Well, Great Books was a big thing going. I don't know who suggested it anyway. We ran it. I mean, there were a lot of guys in it with me, but I was usually at my house. I usually organized it. Fred Frost ran it with me, and what's his name? Forgetting the name of the guy. Was first in it with me. He got tired of it. But it was just sort of a natural thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was told by a couple of people who attended it that they have very fond memories
Really?
of those gatherings. And I'm sure it was very interesting. So it was a co-ed group, right?
Oh, yeah.
See, today, I think it's more likely to find women having a lunchtime books group rather than having evening discussions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it may be that people's lives have changed dramatically, and people don't have time.
Yeah.
Were you ever involved in the PTA or?
Oh, I suppose I belonged to it. I suppose I went to some meetings. I wasn't exactly in my district.
You weren't the leader.
Oh, God, no.
Would it not have been something you would have wanted to do, I guess? How about church?
Yeah, I went to church. Went to Episcopal Church and taught Sunday school.
Oh, you did? And was your whole family involved in the church?
Well, Jack was Episcopalian. Yeah. And later I changed over to the Presbyterian church and sang in the choir, because I liked singing in the choir. And I was also very fond of Stuart McCall. So I became
a Presbyterian?
Well, I don't know. I went to the Presbyterian church anyway, and because I was very fond of Stuart McCall.
Yeah, we should identify Stuart McCall for this tape because not everyone would know who
He was
he
the
was.
minister of the Presbyterian Church here.
For a number of years.
Yeah.
What was it about him that you liked?
It was just a great mind, first-class mind, and a very saintly man. But a real intellect. And I was attracted by that. And then I liked singing in the choir.
I assume that it was, I shouldn't assume this, but somehow I have the feeling that your involvement in the civil rights movement emerged through your connection with him.
Oh my God, no.
Oh.
I was not to Scottsville when I was in school.
No, I didn't. Excuse me. The Wilton part of your, or I take back the whole question then. Let's just say this. I know that in Wilton you became a person who spoke out in support of integration.
We started the civil rights, the idea of the civil rights, having a civil rights group in Wilton was 2 or 3 people in the Congregational Church.
Oh.
And I joined them right away. The first chairman was Beatrice, I think her name is Beatrice Sutherland. She doesn't live here anymore. And then the third year, I guess I became the chairman and stayed the chairman for a while. This had nothing to do with Stuart McCall. I mean, I would have been in it. This was the era before the anti-war movement, and the civil rights movement was taking up everybody's idealistic energies. What we did was, first, we got signatures from 200 or 300 people saying that they would be willing to have a black family live near them.
This is Wilton.
Then we organized interracial parties. We made friends with black professional types around the county, and we had interracial dances, 2 or 3 interracial dances. And we buttonholed real estate men, make them show houses to blacks. And I went up to Hartford on a state commission on human rights.
Really?
And that went on until it was very, very active. I guess we were the most active in the state. Hello, darling, you home? That's Tom.
Hi,
Tom. Then the anti-war movement came along, and most of my troops moved over into that. So about 68 or 69, I guess I think, I don't know what I did with the money. We had some money left, but I gave it back to the members or something.
Mm-hmm.
But the energy was now going in the anti-war movement.
Yeah. That's when I came to Wilton in 1969.
Yeah.
The anti-war movement was quite ongoing. I was a teacher at Wilton High School, and it was very active at the time. But I know in the early 60s you even went to the March on Washington in 1963.
63. March on Washington. There were about 15 of us, I think, from Wilton.
Were they 15 adults, or were they also young people?
No, adults, mostly. Some young people,
How would you assess the results of that effort? In the short run, it sounds like many very positive things happened in this town.
Well, now I don't think, it's happened all over. Now I don't think there'd be any trouble about showing a house to a Negro, but there was then.
Yes, I'm sure.
No real estate man would have thought of showing a house to a Negro.
And as a result of your efforts, how many black
families
families
not many,
moved
because
in?
it's a question of money. This is
Sure.
But there's several black families in town now, I hear. I don't know, I've only met one of them, besides from the Joneses.
How did the realtors respond to this? When you say you buttonholed them, Was there a lot of negative
No, we
response?
just sent them showed them the signatures. No, I don't know if there was.
No. It sounds...
Yeah, I remember David Batchelder, who was a very high-class real estate person, said, we asked him if he'd show a house to a Negro. And he said, well, I guess I would, because I believe in what you're saying, but I don't know whether I'd ever be allowed to show another house. That was 63.
Yeah.
That's not true now.
Well, I know also that you took 6 Wilton teenagers to Mississippi.
Yeah.
When was that?
James. '67, I think, something like that.
Who were these kids?
It was Darius Brubeck.
Darius Brubeck?
Bill Bonvillian. Mariah.
Your daughter?
Yeah. We didn't take her down in Mississippi. She stayed in Lexington with some friends, but there were 3 other guys I didn't know very well. They were brought in by the other guys. Debbie Larned.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I knew her mother.
Yeah.
So you went off to Mississippi. Did you go on a bus with one of those freedom buses?
We drove down.
As part of what organization? Please go to tape 2. Okay, we were talking about the Wilton Council on Human Rights.
Macomb, Mississippi was one of the most scandalous of the oppressors of blacks, and it was notorious for it. People were bombed, and anybody who tried to register to vote was thrown in the clink. And two Wilton ministers, one was Ken Robinson from the Episcopal Church, and I think Chet Miller from the Congregational Church, went to Macomb as part of a group of Protestant ministers starting from the National Council of Churches. And when our ministers came back, they told us all about it. And the Wilton Council on Human Rights announced that they would take Macomb, Mississippi, as a town that they would do the most for if they could. So we invited some of the heroes of Macomb, Mississippi, particularly one woman who had been serving white people in her restaurant and had been bombed. And she came up and made addresses in a church, and another one, a black leader, came up, Harry Bowie, who's a theologian who's down there. And then we published in the Wilton Council on the Human Rights Bulletin. We published a lot of stuff about them, and they were reported in the papers. And then I took my teenagers down there to help register voters under the sponsorship of the lady that we had up here, whose name I can't remember, and the Reverend Harry Bowie.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do such a hell of a lot for Mississippi. It was awfully good for the teenagers. And we went around from house to house saying, have you registered to vote? That's all we did.
Yeah. Well, that's all we did. That's a pretty brave thing to have done.
Yeah.
How long did you stay there?
It was an Easter vacation, I guess maybe 5 or 6 days.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, I guess, because by the time I came here, I had never heard of that organization, and neither did I know that there had ever been such activity. It did fade out of the limelight, to say the least. But I'm sure that it had a permanent effect on those young people, as well as on yourself, I have no doubt. When you dissolved the organization. Were you also interested in this in the anti-war movement?
Well, I was for it, but I don't think I was doing much about it. No, I wasn't.
All of your kids went through the Wilton Public Schools.
Oh, no, not for very long. They went to, my son Nate went off to Andover. My son Amos went to the Unclaw School here and then to Putney. My daughter Rebecca went to that school in Norwalk, not Norwalk, but what's the town to east of West?
Darien? Darien?
Darien is another.
Stanford.
No. Anyways, there's a girls' school down there, right on the water.
Oh, yeah, at Wilson Point.
Wilson Point.
Was it down in Wilson Point?
Yeah, Wilson Point, yeah.
I don't think it's there anymore.
Oh, really?
And I think it emerged with another school. It couldn't be what Green's Farms is now.
It may have merged with Green's Farms, I think.
I'll have to look it up.
I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, both my daughters went there. And then Rebecca went to Wickham Rise for 4 years, and Mariah went to Putney. No, she went to the other one. They offshoot of Putney. Can't remember the name of that either.
So when you came here, you thought you were going to be putting your children...
Well, we did get a lot of good education, but after the 8th grade, they...
Were those the days when children went to school in Westport for high school?
No.
No. You just had felt that you wanted a different kind of educational experience for them?
I don't know what I thought.
Yeah. During all of this time, 60s, early 70s, were you also doing any writing?
Can't remember.
Well, I have the feeling that you never stopped writing altogether, but
I don't think I
how
was.
about for in the civil rights activity? Did you write about that at all?
I don't think I did much of anything. I can't remember anything about the 70s. I don't know what I did.
Well, that's your husband died in 1979.
Yeah.
And I understand that is when you resumed writing as a more, at least more actively.
Well, a lot of fables came into my head, and so I put them down.
Well, let's talk about the fables. Since you are the fabulous fabulist of Wilton. Had you ever done fables before?
Just the La Fontaine, yeah. Oh, I don't know how I happened to do them. It just occurred.
And you've been writing them for, what, about 5 years?
Oh, it's just a couple of years on them. What's the name? A1, A2, maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe.
Are you still writing fables?
I've got 3 more in my head, yeah. I have to get them on paper.
Well, I can't tell you how pleasurable it was to read them.
Really?
I loved reading them, and I'm sure that many other people would also. And in fact, I let my son read some of them.
Really?
And he thought they were very clever. He's 15. In my mind, more people should have the chance to do so. And I wondered if you've thought about having them published.
Yeah, we have. I don't know what kind of a publisher would do it. I don't know. I thought of having it publishing them myself. Maybe I will get something just for the family.
I have a feeling you could, that magazines may like to do
Maybe.
something like that.
Maybe.
You haven't actively pursued this, though.
Well, I'm pretty weak. I'm not up to much of anything.
Others will have to do it for you.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to Liz Lauer's musical interpretation of your
She
thing?
did a wonderful job. She made them sound more interesting than they did, but and I knew they could sound. She was a wonderful girl. She really did wonderful things to the fables.
I agree.
Yeah.
I had the impression that she's thinking of continuing with it.
Is she?
Has she mentioned that to you?
Well, she's gotten lots of compliments.
Yeah. It's a very it's unique and entertaining. The
singers were wonderful because I really liked them. They put a lot into it.
They did.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any thoughts about writing in the future?
No.
You must
I'll
sit here.
I'll try and get my other fables down on paper sometime.
Yeah. How about your own memoirs? I would think they would be most fascinating.
That doesn't occur to me now.
I'd like to ask you before we finish the interview to just talk about your children and your grandchildren. For the record, you have 4 children.
My oldest, I have a stepson, John Jessup, Jr., who I've been very close to. He was only 2 when Jack and I got married. And I'm close to him and his 2 daughters. My oldest son, Nathaniel, has had 6 children by 2 marriages. The 2 oldest ones were here, lived a lot with me. And there are 2 others living here now, 2 middle sons living here. So I like all the children. My son Amos lives in California, and he just had his first baby, and I haven't seen him. And my daughter Rebecca lives in Denver, and she has 2 children, and they've been here a lot. And Mariah had a child and was divorced from that husband, and she's remarried to Anders Grunmere, Swedish, and she does not have any children by this marriage yet.
But just being in your house, I can appreciate how much children mean to you. Since I saw one of your young grandchildren just earlier, but they obviously enjoyed this beautiful house.
I like the children there. I like having them there.
Do you get to go out at all anymore?
Well, I'm going to try and get out tomorrow. I'm going to try and go out for dinner tomorrow. If I can make it.
Another person I did think we should mention for the record is your sister and her rather well-known husband.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about her and him and where they are.
They live in Fairfield, and they have 2 children, a beautiful house. They have another house in Vermont, and we all get along fine.
Since Robert Penn Warren has been named Poet Laureate, has there been any change in the direction of their lives?
No.
I guess that at this point in his life, he is not expected to do more than he wants to do.
He's over 80, you know.
Is he? No, I didn't know.
And he isn't very well. And so he can't do much.
Well, it's very exciting to have
very exciting,
someone like that in your family.
Well, he's the only one I think now living who who deserved it. Archie McLeish would have certainly loved to have it, but he wasn't here.
Well, it's interesting that they've, at this time in our country's history, decided that we needed Poet Laureate. Well, Eunice, this has been a very short interview.
Yeah.
And it, for me, only reinforces my feelings that there are many, many other interesting aspects of your life. For now, I'd like to say thank you very much for sharing your life with me and for people of Wilton.
Very pretty manners you have.
I hope we can Do it again sometime.
All right. Okay.